The best and worst places to live for African Americans in Florida. So we did a video on this topic back in 2023 and 20,000 people saw it. And now we got some feedback from the audience on this topic that's very important for a lot of people. You saw what the title of this video was. You knew what it was about when you clicked on it. So if you got a bad opinion about this video, just go watch something else. I really don't give a crap. Today, African Americans are looking for a good place to live, away from racism and crime, where they can enjoy living in a place where they feel comfortable. Just like anybody else, people want the best for their families. The first thing I want to do is go over a few comments from the last video that some of you guys said, just to set the tone for today's video. The first comment is somebody from Lakeland, Florida. That's Polk County, right outside of Tampa. And they say that despite the fact there's diversity, they really don't feel comfortable in Polk County and they're considering moving. This is a very important point. Just because your community has diversity doesn't mean that the people living there get along. And in fact, most wealthy black people prefer to live in white communities, not in diverse areas, which just goes to show that just because your own demographic or a more diverse demographic exists somewhere, that doesn't mean that that's where you want to put your family. The real problem is that the reason some communities are exclusively white isn't exactly that blacks or Hispanics or other people can't afford it, but that if you move there, it's a problem because they're racist. So as far as that goes, as long as the community is not racist, it doesn't matter what the ethnicity or composition of a community may be. And that's really going to be important for today's video because, again, a lot of African American people don't want to live in an African American community. They want to live in a safe and comfortable community, but at the same time, a community where they can feel comfortable. So safety, race, and comfort, all those are different things. A community could be your same exact demographic, and you may not want to live there. And let me be clear, the purpose of today's video is people who have money and can live wherever the crap they want to, and they want to find the most comfortable, nice, elegant place to live where they don't have to worry about feeling uncomfortable. So if you want a budget, this video may not be for you. David is an African American doctor and retired military. He moved to Florida from LA, and he can't believe how racist and segregated Florida is. He says he's in the Jacksonville area and he's shocked that it's worse than California. Now, despite the fact this person is a doctor, if he had just done some basic research, he would have found out that, Florida, particularly Jacksonville, is analytically worse than Los Angeles in every way possible. Higher homicide rate, higher overdose rates. Every type of analytical information will confirm to you that, Jacksonville, Florida is way worse than Los Angeles. But of course, people buy into the politics of things and then they forget the real life information, like the fact that Jacksonville is considerably more dangerous than Los Angeles. And of course, racism plays a role into that because if a community is dangerous, you feel uncomfortable, and well, it just goes hand in hand with racism. And honestly, analytically, hate does really go hand in hand with racism. If a place is extraordinarily dangerous, usually it's also extraordinarily racist. If a place is extraordinarily safe, racism plays a smaller role in those communities. Jonas basically says, you better stay the crap out of Southwest Florida, Corlier, Lee, Manatee, Hillsborough. It's really at Broward and Palm Beach County. And that's exactly what real life information and analytics are going to show you. On today's video, we're not just going to talk about opinions. We're going to show you real life information. And for a fact, all the information on today's video points to Palm Beach and Broward counties as being the best place, not just by opinion, but also by real life numbers. Now, when it comes to Florida's African American communities, the one we're in right now is outside of Miami. This is an event where literally there was thousands of black people, and I was like one of like 3 or 4 white or non-black people there, and nobody bothered me. I walked around recording. Everything was chill and legit. That's the way we get down in South Florida. I know there's a lot of racism in the northern half of the state. In the southern half of the state, I've been to many African American events like this where I might be the only non-black person there. And on top of that, I got a camera. Nobody bothers me. That's just the way we get down here in Florida. Again, you can't say the same thing about other parts of the state. For example, this video I filmed in Belglade, Florida at an event many years ago. I was literally the only non-black people here that I saw. Late at night, I'm the only person here who ain't black. Small little country town in the middle of nowhere, Belgrade, Florida. Nobody bothered me. And I had a camera. So this is the way we get down in South Florida. I can't speak for the rest of the state. So growing up here in South Florida, my whole life, I've been around black people, never once felt uncomfortable. You guys know I moved to Montgomery, Alabama, and up there I had to be afraid of black people. So all communities are not the same. In the case here of Florida, it don't really matter. In South Florida particularly, we're all the same. But coming from here, moving to Alabama, I discovered that the Deep South is a place where even African Americans don't treat me the way I would treat them. So you have to understand that racism varies from place to place. Here in South Florida, it's all legit, cool, comfortable. I've never felt uncomfortable around African American communities in South Florida. Currently, I live in Sarasota, Florida, Bradenton area. Just a few days ago, I did a video in the projects in Sarasota. Nobody bothered me. In fact, somebody recognized me from the YouTube channel, said what's up. So like I said, in this part of South Florida, it just ain't like that. So what you guys got to grab from today's video is when you talk about Sarasota, you talk about Fort Myers, you talk about Naples, you talk about Broward, Palm Beach, Dade County, and even down there in the Florida Keys, it just ain't the same. When you go a little bit further north in the Central Florida, it cranks up a little bit. Tampa, Lakeland, Orlando, it cranks up a little bit. You get to Jacksonville in the Florida Panhandle, then it's red hot. It's a completely more divisive racial environment. So you got to understand that for real, there's a definite lack of racism in the southern part of the state. The fact that the African American community is so welcoming to outsiders here in South Florida would suggest that they don't feel threatened by the presence of other people. Now, my perception as a not black person of Sarasota and racism, I feel like there is no racism here. I feel like the black community here should feel comfortable, and I work in their community all the time. But when I look at some analytics, the real life information paints a completely different picture. So let's put away opinions to the side and let's talk about some real numbers on racism in Florida. And yes, there are real analytics on racism. Back in 2023, the last year that information exists, according to Florida Health, Sarasota County's overdose death rate was extraordinarily high at 46 per 100,000. Now, St. Johns County, that's St. Augustine, their overdose death rate for the African American community was only 6 per 100,000. Now, it's interesting because I feel very comfortable in Sarasota's African American community. Now, high overdose death rates usually indicate desperation, addiction, a lot of bad things. And unfortunately, when you look at African American communities in Sarasota, the analytics don't look good. It was even worse the previous year in 2022. In 2022, the overdose death rate for blacks in Sarasota County was over 60 per 100,000, significantly higher than the white population. Now, normally, blacks are disproportionately less likely to die from an overdose than white. So there's a problem with addiction in the black communities of Sarasota, and these numbers are alarmingly high. So my perception of racism here is that it isn't a problem, but why is this African American community so desperate? Why are there so many drugs in this African American community if from the exterior it appears that there isn't a problem? Now, you guys remember that I said that in St. Johns County, that's St. Augustine, it was only 6 per 100,000, so it's just a fraction. However, let me show you guys a recent experience that I had while visiting the African American community in St. Johns County. While working in the small African American community here, I actually fell for a speed trap and got pulled over. Now, extraordinarily high policing of black areas usually suggests racism, and that's exactly what I felt with this encounter. Basically, I feel like I got pulled over for being white in a black area. In fact, I pulled myself over. I saw the cop, saw what he was doing. I just decided he's going to pull me over. Now, we got a warning because my wife, who was the passenger, had COVID at the time, and I guess the cop didn't want to catch that. But regardless, the situation is that it's been my experience from my videos and from studies that the northeast part of Florida is extraordinarily racist. St. Johns County, Duval County, that whole northeast side of the state, from my perspective, seems like it's extraordinarily racist. For one, law enforcement is persistently inside the African American communities. And I guess even being white in a black area is enough to get pulled over. Now, in my travels across America, I haven't really got pulled over in any places except for St. Johns County. And that should just give you an idea that police profiling is a real thing here, and that police in this corner of Florida is always targeting these black neighborhoods. For example, as of recently, I was in Melbourne, Florida. I experienced the same thing. I made a whole video showing how in Melbourne, Florida, cops are always in the black area of the city, despite the fact that the overdose crisis is predominantly affecting the white community. So it doesn't feel right in this area. And many of our comments in the videos confirm the same thing. The African Americans that live in the northeast corner of Florida do not feel comfortable. Now you got to scratch your head and wonder, despite the fact it seems and feels racist, that analytics for African Americans in St. Johns County, the St. Augustine area right outside of Jacksonville, are actually pretty impressive in a good way. So there's kind of a conundrum. Now, my belief in this situation, from what I understand about analytics, is that sometimes when there's excessive police profiling, it's done from a malignant perspective, but it actually helps the community because people are more likely to not get involved in illegal activities. People are more cautious not to break the law, not to hold substances. And sometimes when law enforcement looks the other way, it just kind of allows people to get deeper into criminal activities. But when a community like the African American communities here in St. Johns County are constantly being scrutinized by law enforcement, actually being profiled all the time, people kind of tighten up a little bit, and it actually helps create a better community. So I know to some of you guys, the notion that police profiling actually helps communities become better may sound crazy, but there's actually an analytical concordance with that theory. And I have seen that the more profiling a place is, the more individuals are likely not to break the law, to just be more responsible. And this can be proven with the fact that in the United States, African American and Hispanic communities have considerably lower overdose death rates despite police profiling. Now, over the last few years, police profiling has kind of stopped, with body cam footage and just social movements that have happened. And now you're seeing the African American and Hispanic overdose death rates start to correlate more with the white population. So it is possible that police profiling actually contributes to better analytics among those communities. Now, I know today's video is about African Americans, but I want to illustrate something to you guys using analytics for Latinos. Kentucky is among one of the worst places for Latinos when it comes to income. Kentucky has the 5th lowest incomes for Latinos in the whole country. It's a horrible place for Latino incomes. But there's a few select counties outside of Louisville, Kentucky, that actually have among the top 100 incomes for Latinos in the United States. One particular county outside of Louisville is tied at number 1 at over $250,000. So maybe ask yourself, overall, the state of Kentucky is a horrible place for Latinos, but here's these few select counties where Latino incomes are among the highest in the country. Now, highlighted in red, Jefferson and Fayette County, that's Louisville and Lexington, are really kind of in the bottom middle for Latino incomes, but that's where the bulk of the population is. Those counties up there that have those really high incomes are counties on the outskirts of those larger cities where Latinos with a lot of money move to. So numerically, they're a very small percentage, but analytically, they're the ones that have the most money. And this could kind of explain why St. Johns County, Florida, has incredible analytics for African Americans, like really low overdose death rates, extraordinarily high incomes. In fact, let's look at some analytics for St. Johns County. When it comes to overdoses, African Americans and blacks in St. Johns County have lower than state and lower than even the white population numbers. In fact, there's years where the number's been 0. On the right side of this chart, you can see that incomes for African Americans in St. Johns County is the highest in the state of Florida. Highlighted in yellow, all those are counties right on the outskirts of Jacksonville, Florida. So we can see that incomes for African Americans are the highest in all the rural white counties on the outskirts of Jacksonville, Florida. And in fact, there's a few counties in this area where incomes for African Americans are actually higher than the white population. Highlighted in yellow are larger cities that have a significant African American population but lower incomes. So wouldn't all this kind of suggest that analytically, St. Johns County and those rural counties outside of Jacksonville, like Clay and Nassau County, would be the best places for African Americans? Analytically, you could draw that conclusion because, after all, the rural counties outside of Jacksonville really do have the best income and overdose analytics for African Americans. But there's a problem with that. And it's the reason why I showed you guys that illustration about Latinos in Kentucky. And that is that analytically, African Americans are a very small percentage of the population in those areas. And they're people that are fleeing a larger city, moving to a suburban setting because they have a lot of money. And that means that those people don't necessarily represent the majority of black people in that region. And that is why these analytics can be a little misleading. Outside of Jacksonville in 2023, Nassau County, one of those good analytic counties, had an overdose death rate for African Americans of over 100 per 100,000, which is just insanely high. So there's just some question marks about these analytics. On one side, things seem extraordinarily good for African Americans, but you just have to remember that for the most part, that population represents the African American community, and the bulk of the African American community is in Duval County, and things in Duval County for African Americans are not looking good. Now, 6 days ago, over 1,000 people on our channel voted, and you guys, from a perception, overwhelmingly think that Jacksonville is the best place for African Americans in Florida. Now, according to you guys, Tallahassee and Jacksonville are the best place for African Americans in Florida. However, when you look at incomes, analytically, neither Duval nor Leon County are actually among the top places for incomes for African Americans. When you look at the white population, both Leon and Duval County are kind of behind the pack. They're more affordable places to begin with, right? So the cost of living may actually be better there, but that doesn't mean it's better overall. So the real issue is that there's a disparaging difference in incomes versus white and black when you look at Duval and Leon County. So despite the fact Tallahassee and Jacksonville have the perception of being good places for African Americans because there's a large number of African Americans, when you look at the income gap, it's just disproportionate. Highlighted in red, Duval and Leon counties are kind of behind the pack, but still towards the top. There they are highlighted in red. That's Tallahassee and Jacksonville. On the left for the white population, they're up there. They're not the highest, but they're up there. But then when you look at the same analytics for the black population, they're not even on the list. They're way at the bottom. So that's really the problem with Tallahassee and Jacksonville, that as a whole, the area does really good with analytics. Not as much income as like the other counties in Florida that are larger, but they do okay. They're right behind the pack, right? But then when you look at just the black people in those counties, they're not in there. So that doesn't happen with other counties. And basically what I'm trying to tell you is, despite the perception that because there's a large African American community in Tallahassee and Jacksonville, that things are going good for them there, that's not really the case. When you look at the numbers, it isn't really fair at all. It's actually pretty messed up. And then you have to remember that the African Americans that do have money in Jacksonville, well, they move out of Jacksonville. So how can Jacksonville be a hub for African Americans? As soon as African Americans get some money, they're moving out of Jacksonville to the adjacent counties. But wait a minute, doesn't that happen with Hispanics? Doesn't that happen in Tampa? Doesn't that just happen everywhere? Yeah, it kind of does happen everywhere. But again, it all comes down to comparing incomes of whites to blacks. You start to see that in those places, the gap between whites and blacks economically is significantly worse, which means that discrimination has to be worse because people don't have opportunities. Now, this is a race map. You can see at the bottom that the black people are represented by the color green. Now, this is Broward County. This is the Fort Lauderdale area. To me, the best place for African Americans to live is in Broward County. And I say that because you can see that there's African Americans scattered into Coral Springs, Parkland, in really nice suburbs. They're mixed with the white, they're mixed with the black, a little bit of red in there for Asian. These are areas that are diverse, they're safe. Keep in mind that Coral Springs and Parkland are among some of the safest suburbs in Florida. So you have safety, you have extraordinarily high incomes, and you have diversity. Now, when it comes to incomes for African Americans, the rural counties are the worst. And highlighted in red, you can see Leon and Gadsden County. These are counties that people just have a perception are good places for black people, but analytically, the incomes there are just far behind. And it isn't that, people in rural communities make less money, but then when you throw it up against the white population in those counties, you'll see that there's just this disparaging gap between those incomes. So rural counties are definitely to be avoided. Among the worst, counties like Henry, counties like DeSoto seem to be just kind of consistently the worst places for African Americans. And I've done videos on DeSoto County and how messed up things are there. It isn't just that the incomes there are the worst in Florida for African Americans. It's also that like police profiling is real. When African Americans get arrested in those counties in Florida, they're usually given enhancements like 1,000 feet from a school. And well, that's a whole nother topic for another video. But the point being that Florida's rural counties, particularly the south central part of the state and the northern part of the state, analytics for African Americans there are bad. So it's clear that coastal communities in the southern part of the state are better analytically, but inland, that changes quickly, with those landlocked counties seeming to be like the worst places to be in Florida for African Americans. Incarceration rates, homicide rates, over those rates. As of right now, Glades County, which is like in the middle of the Everglades down there, has had the worst overdose death rates of African Americans so far in the state as of recently. And a lot of the Native American communities are also dealing with the same problem there. And that's because Native Americans and African Americans are kind of in the same areas down there. So these rural counties analytically have a lot of problems going on. Another great place for African Americans seems to be Port St. Lucie. Again, you can see that there's African American communities there, kind of more mixed with white suburban areas. Now in Port St. Lucie, African Americans actually have higher incomes than whites. And interestingly, there's a few counties in Florida where African Americans are doing better than whites, in particular Pasco County. So there's a few places in Florida where blacks are doing better than whites. Now, many years ago, that would have been unheard of. So what I'm really trying to say on today's video is that yes, there are a few places in Florida where the black community isn't just doing good, but they're doing better than the white communities. And overall, they're not bad places to live. So if you're African American or black and thinking about moving to Florida, yeah, there's places in Florida where you're going to be all right. But it's not everywhere in the state. It's a few hand-selected places. Now, so far, we've gone over Broward County, which I do think is the best place. Port St. Lucie is another place where analytically things are looking good. Now, Pasco County is an interesting one. That's an area north of Tampa with suburbs like Wesley Chapel. I say interesting because Hispanics and blacks have higher incomes than whites in that county, but Hispanics and blacks are people from Tampa moving into the suburbs for affordability, and the white population in that county has been there from before, and they're not commuting into the city, which means that their incomes are naturally going to be less. So it's a thing of perspective as well. So yes, Hispanics and blacks in Pasco County are making more money than whites, but the whites are retired and they're already there, and the Hispanics and blacks are emerging, moving into the suburbs. So it's not like these people are, you're not comparing apples to apples. You're comparing people who are moving into suburbs with people who are already there. Now this is the Port St. Lucie area, and the same thing has kind of happened here with people from Palm Beach and Broward and Dade County have moved up here. Now the analytics for St. Lucie, despite being kind of suburban, I'm not impressed by them. I think their homicide rate's a little bit too high for being a suburban county, but regardless, it's kind of suburban, it's kind of nice. There's a lot of African American people living out there, and they're living in good communities with good analytics. So this is Port St. Lucie. It's nice, and I would definitely recommend it if you're African American. I think there's even a YouTuber that's African American that's kind of got a big channel there talking about real estate and stuff like that. So that's probably part of the momentum moving forward. But if you want to live in a nice, clean place, that's an option. I mean, Port St. Lucie, it's beautiful, it's clean, it's suburban, and you got African Americans living in good suburban areas there. It isn't disproportionately African American, it's just a good mix. And with good analytics, why wouldn't it work out for you? Now, for a fact, I wouldn't go any more north of here. From Fort Pierce moving north, the climate changes. Now, in the Florida Panhandle, there's a few counties that have good analytics for African Americans, but in 2022, Okaloosa County had like 90 per 100,000. Like 20 people died that were black with overdoses in this county. That doesn't make sense. It doesn't check out. So it's kind of like some of these counties, they look good over here, but then there's like all these like abnormalities, and usually that's not a good sign. So the Florida Panhandle, I would say like a solid pass for African Americans. And just so you understand, like overdoses for African Americans in Miami are 16. In Duval, Jacksonville, it's like double that at 32. But then when you get to like the Florida Panhandle, Escambria County, which is Pensacola, their overdose death rates are 4 times higher than Miami for African Americans. So the general trend is like in South Florida, African Americans aren't dealing with that much of a drug crisis. You get to Jacksonville and it's double. You get to the Florida Panhandle and it's 4 times more than Miami. And these analytics are kind of mirrored the same for like Hispanics. So as a general trend, like I said, the southern half of the state is going to give you better odds for sure. By the time you get up to the Florida Panhandle, it just ain't looking good. And you know, just like those analytics we went over of Hispanics in Kentucky, yes, in the Panhandle, there are a few counties like Santa Rosa that have good incomes for African Americans, but you're talking about just a hand-selected number overall. It isn't a large number, just individual people who are there, and they're so small a portion of the population that they can have like disproportionately good analytics, but that doesn't mean that if you're black and you move there, you're going to end up in the same outcome as them. This is the suburb of Parkland in Broward County. This is an area that has a lot of African Americans. They got good analytics, they got good incomes, they got low overdose death rates. It's safe, it's beautiful, it's tropical, it's got everything going for it. It's a nice area, and your demographic is going to match the criteria of good living in this part of the state. But apart from Broward County, I guess the second best place would have to be West Palm Beach area, which is Palm Beach Gardens and just Palm Beach County in general. Now you can see that there's African Americans just kind of scattered throughout the whole map. North of West Palm Beach, you can see that glob of like just purely black. That's a pretty bad area. I would suggest kind of like everything that's kind of like mixed looking, kind of like on the bottom half of that map would be a better place if you're African American. Riviera Beach doesn't have great analytics, but overall, Palm Beach County as a whole, like you can't just focus on like, okay, here's the black part of Palm Beach County. It's horrible. Don't look at it that way. Palm Beach County as a whole, like when you look at the entirety of the African American community there, they have some great income analytics. They have some really low overdose analytics. Now, there's no nice way of saying this, but I'm going to go ahead and say it because it's the truth and it needs to be said. The core of the African American community, like in Palm Beach County, isn't the same as like African Americans moving to like Wellington or Jupiter or Palm Beach Gardens. The way law enforcement and people in the community view that part of West Palm Beach or Palm Beach County versus how they view like African Americans that are out in the suburbs is two completely different things. And I don't want to elaborate too much on this particular topic, but I know for a fact that, from a law enforcement perspective, school board perspective, and many other community attributes, it isn't exactly a clean situation all the way through in Palm Beach County. So that's why I'm saying, like, you can't really say that if you're a black person currently living in a bad neighborhood in Palm Beach County, that things look great for you. But if you're an African American and you're moving down with some money and you end up in Wellington or a nicer part of Palm Beach County or Royal Palm or something, then your outlook and analytics are going to be kind of different than somebody like in Riviera Beach. And again, there's no nice way of saying that, but it's kind of the way things are. But analytically, as a whole, African Americans in Palm Beach County are probably the number 2 best in Florida after Broward. It's a great tourist destination. You got great shopping. You got great things to do, good nightlife. Palm Beach County is a clear choice for African Americans looking to move to Florida. If you're doing business, you're going to be all right. The people here are not like messed up or weird. I mean, the way they look at kind of like those inner city African American communities is not the way they're going to look at you moving there with money. So Palm Beach County definitely would have to be towards the top of the best places you could end up. And it's a beautiful place to live in Florida. Extraordinarily expensive, but I think it's a very healthy African American community overall. This is Parrish, Florida, outside of Bradenton and Tampa. You can see that there is some African Americans like in the urban core, but out in the suburbs, it's white, it's blue, but it's not like a pure blue. It's kind of like a light blue. In other words, there's just a small number of people here that are not white. It's probably like 20 or 30%, but it's good enough to where you won't be the only black person out here. Now, Parrish, Florida is a growing suburban area. It's a great place for retirement, a little bit more challenging for day commuters because the infrastructure here hasn't caught up. Parrish was the 9th fastest growing zip code in the United States and the #1 fastest growing in Florida. This is just north of Lakewood Ranch. I think some neighborhoods here are going to be 10-20% African American. I think a few communities might even be closer to 30% African American. These are suburban areas. It's attracting a lot of suburban people from Tampa looking to live in the outskirts. So it's suburban, it's fast growing, it's nice, and you do see a lot of African Americans here. Is it 40 or 50% black? It isn't. But it's enough to where you're not going to be the only person out there. It doesn't feel like white suburbia. It feels a little bit diverse. It's a small town. It's still part of a good urban core. And like I said, if you're looking for retirement as an African American, you're definitely going to like this area. Now, I've talked to people from New York, for example, and they don't feel that it's as embracing as New York. But if you're not that sensitive, you got a little bit of tough skin, and you want to live somewhere suburban, this is a good option. I say this is a good place for African Americans who are retiring because it's somewhat of a food desert as well as a traffic nightmare because of lack of infrastructure. Now, there's an abnormally large amount of African Americans living out here who actually make the stupid commute into Tampa, St. Pete, or Bradenton. And I say stupid because it doesn't make sense. Until you realize that a new house here in Parrish is more affordable than a house in the inner city in Tampa, St. Pete, and Bradenton, does it start to make sense? It's a decision I would personally never make, but there are a lot of African Americans from Tampa, St. Pete, and Bradenton, and even Sarasota, who are living out here now in Parrish and making that long, difficult commute into those cities for work, where they can buy in the suburbs a brand new house for less than what the house would cost in a bad inner city neighborhood. The problem that I have with this situation is that I believe in convenience and living in a food desert in the suburbs, so there's practically nothing on top of that. Road traffic congestion, to me, doesn't make sense. But for people who just want to buy a house and live that suburban lifestyle, no matter how difficult it may be, if you're that endeavoring and that willing to fight for that, good for you. But the point is, you're starting to see here that there is an emerging African American community in a suburban area. You can go north into Riverview, which is another good area for African Americans. Analytically, there's been just a few homicides and stuff to where it's starting to look kind of more bougie than suburban. But if you got a little bit more money, hop on down to Lakewood Ranch. And while Lakewood Ranch isn't as black as Parrish, it's kind of, you don't see too many black people here. But the black people that I do see here, they feel comfortable. I Uber drive and I live here in Lakewood Ranch, and I occasionally get black people that live out here on Uber, and I straight up ask them how they feel about living out here, and they tell me they love it. Only complaint as well is kind of bland when it comes to restaurants and things to do. But if you are African American looking to retirement and you're okay with a little bit of a commute, Parrish is a great option. Like I said, if you got a little bit more money and you can pull off Lakewood Ranch, I'm not going to tell you it's perfect when it comes to the comfort level. In the almost 3 years that I've been here in Lakewood Ranch, I've seen more than one racial agitator. There's a trail where this black girl, she goes jogging and people throw watermelons on the trail. I've seen that. I've been walking around and I've heard people scream racial slurs. So there's definitely agitators here in Lakewood Ranch. And it is kind of almost pushing 80 or 90% white. Now, there's a lot of students here, so you get Indians, you get some Spanish people. It's kind of mixed to a small degree, a lot of Europeans as well. But blacks are definitely not the majority out here. it's a nice suburban area, but there are some agitators. Is it overwhelmingly racist or uncomfortable, or people are gonna make your life impossible? No. But are you gonna need a little bit of a tough skin to make it out here? Probably, because like I said, there are some agitators out here. Once you get into Parrish, I feel like it feels like there's significantly more African Americans there. Now, Parrish is in Manatee County, and I have to admit that the analytics for African Americans in Manatee County are abysmal. I think most of it represents Palmetto and Bradenton, not so much Parrish, but high overdose death rates, income gap that's kind of questionable. Analytically, it doesn't look that great. But like I said, because prices in St. Petersburg, Tampa, and Bradenton are higher, a lot of African Americans are moving out here into this suburbia where they can get a brand new freaking house for less, despite all the inconveniences. St. Petersburg's African American community is on the southern side of the city. That's where the Skyway Bridge is. So if you get on that bridge, it's a 30-minute drive to Parrish. So that's kind of convenient for living in Parrish. That in 35 minutes you can be in St. Pete. And many of the youth and people from St. Petersburg, it's an older core. There's nowhere to grow. So if people want suburban living in St. Petersburg, particularly among the African American community, one of the most logical options is Parrish. So I do believe that this African American community is going to continue to grow. And there was practically nothing out here. It's all new construction. So, people can't really feel too possessive of a place that, was built yesterday. Now, St. Petersburg is a fun, hip city. Overall, it's very safe. The southern half of the city is predominantly African American. There is a segregation line. I think it's called Central, that kind of divides the city in half, with most of the blacks in St. Pete living south of that line. St. Petersburg is a lot safer than Jacksonville, but the analytics for addiction for whites and blacks are significantly higher here. So in St. Petersburg, you have more of a drug problem, but you have kind of, I guess, a better situation with crime overall. A real problem in St. Petersburg, Florida, is along the beaches. Now, St. Petersburg Beach, Treasure Island, that coastline, it's really bad for police profiling. I've heard the stories from a lot of people, and I actually witnessed it myself. After the hurricanes, I witnessed African-American rapper Nino Breeze get arrested. He was just looking at the hurricane damage just like I was, but he was black, so they kind of pulled him over in front of me. I got it on video, and then I kind of changed my mind. I need to pull the body cam footage for that for my YouTube channel. But anyways, I've actually personally witnessed the profiling in St. Petersburg, and it isn't just African Americans along the coastline of the beaches. It's also anybody who's poor, looks out of place. So the rich people along the coast of St. Petersburg Beach are very particular about people and things that don't look like they're in the right place. So if you look like you're out of place there, it's a problem. So I feel like a lot of people leaving St. Petersburg, like they have a little bit of money, they want to get some suburban housing. When they come over here to Parrish, they're finding kind of a more comfortable vibe or something like that, where they really don't have the option to move into the wider parts of Pinellas County. And again, that's one of those things that there's no nice way of saying it. Like, I love Pinellas County, but these analytics are pretty straightforward. Just a fairly high overdose death rate for the black community kind of screams desperation, and it's kind of known for that. So this is probably one reason why, the African American community in St. Petersburg, they live there, they commute there and all that, but when they go to buy a home, a lot of them are looking to the Parrish area. I do believe that this African American community is going to continue to grow, and I do think that it's a good option for people who are African American looking to move to Florida, to live in a suburban area where there's enough black people but not overwhelmingly black. It's kind of like a good balance all the way around. Definitely lacking amenities, but making up for it in price tag. Now, just to the north of Parrish is Riverview. Riverview is very diverse. There's more Hispanics, blacks here. I think Riverview is kind of a good option for a suburb that's kind of mixed. Recently, a few kind of notable things have happened here that haven't been good with shootings. I think there's just been kind of a lot of criminality for people who reside here. So it's starting to look like, crime is increasing here, but it's not dangerous or horrible. It's just higher than it should be for a suburban area. But, if you want to be closer to Tampa, then Riverview is another great option for people looking to live somewhere suburban but nice, that has more restaurants and things to do. But here you are further from beaches, and traffic can be a nightmare. And well, just to summarize Parrish, Florida, when you look at it from a race map, you can see that it's not dark blue, it's not purely white, it's just kind of like, you know, like a little bit mostly white, but not just white. So it's kind of like a good balance where white's still the majority, but it isn't the only people out there. Jacksonville, Florida. So if you're coming from Cincinnati, Louisville, Detroit, Chicago, St. Louis, you're going to think that Jacksonville is safe because it is safer than all those larger American cities. But compared to other cities in Florida like Tampa, Orlando, and Miami, Jacksonville is still significantly more dangerous. So it's all about your perspective. I've seen a lot of people say that they moved to Jacksonville from Louisville and they think it's a lot safer. Well, good for you. But if you're moving to the state of Florida, Jacksonville is the most dangerous city here. I really wouldn't recommend moving to the urban core of Jacksonville. Even for African Americans, the overdose death rates are too high. The homicide rates for the entire Duval County, I think, is the highest in Florida right now. So there's nothing about this place that would tell me this is a place you would move to if you want to make your life better. With the exception, of course, of economics. The cost of living in Jacksonville and the job opportunities make it probably the easiest place to live in Florida from an economical perspective. So if that's important to you, then Jacksonville's hard to beat. And it is a beautiful city with beautiful beaches, a beautiful coastline. There's great things about Jacksonville, incredible food scene. But the problem is that most people today, particularly African Americans, are looking to live far away from like centers of crime and poverty. And they're just trying to live kind of like a decent, refined life. And in Jacksonville, the hood rattery is never far away. With all that said, if I were moving to Jacksonville, I would want to be on the east side of the city, what's known as Jacksonville Beaches. So basically anything east of Arlington is a good area. It's kind of suburban, you're close to beaches, and Jacksonville is kind of like offset a little bit inland. So there's been an opportunity between beaches and urban core for a little bit of suburban development in the middle, and that's a good area to be overall. So the city core of Jacksonville is extraordinarily dangerous, and the outskirts are really country and rural. So this feels more like a deep south city than it does a city in Florida. Over the last few years, things have been changing. If you look at a race map of Jacksonville, you'll see that on the east side of the city, there's a lot of diversity now, and black people are making up part of that diversity. So there's definitely great things happening in Jacksonville as far as demographical changes to make it more of an attractive place versus more of the old school southern segregationist areas. Without a doubt, you can see that the area east or south of the river has the most diversity. And anything on the northwest side of Jacksonville, you can see that it's either purely black or purely white. So it's still southern segregationist up that way. It's just kind of, like I said, the area east of Arlington where things have just kind of become normal, and you're seeing people from Florida, you're seeing Europeans. So it's becoming more of a diverse and welcoming place in that part of Jacksonville. And economically, the area has grown quite a bit. But the rest of Jacksonville, the old core of the city, it remains like a southern segregationist type city. And that's probably the last thing you want if you're African American. You probably want to just kind of be like everybody else, not live in a place that's still stuck in the past. And with a lot of things, there's like social media and perception, and then there's the reality. I've Uber driven in Jacksonville, even in some of the worst areas like Moncrief at night, and the people that I encounter in person are very different from the perception you get off of social media. So one thing is perception, and another thing is reality. So at the end of the day, Jacksonville does have a lot of great things about it. But for the most part, the numbers paint a clear picture. High crime rate, high addiction rate, and of course, economical injustices in some parts of the city, while the people that have money are kind of fleeing to the outskirts, where now you have normally good analytics for African Americans that are leaving Jacksonville, which would suggest that if you have money, why would you move to a place that other people that have money are fleeing? And this is definitely not a diss on Jacksonville, but it's just the reality of the picture that these numbers and analytics paint for people. So a while back when I made my first video about African Americans moving to Florida, I mentioned Estero, Florida. Estero is located halfway between Naples and Fort Myers, and it's kind of a fast-growing suburban area. So back then, I didn't really have a good picture. I was just giving you guys my own personal perspective. And I've noticed that I made the video talking about how I thought Estero would be a great place for African Americans, And a lot of African Americans actually moved to Estero because of that video. Now, Estero hasn't become a black community or nothing like that, but there are starting to be like visibly more African Americans here. So it seems that for those looking to live in the Fort Myers area that are African American, want to be in a hip and fast and growing place, and just kind of like a really good safe spot, Estero's worked out great. Now it's still overwhelmingly white here, but because it's suburban, like Estero, nothing was here. So you don't really have that, setup system or none of that. Like this is a place that practically didn't even exist many years ago. So when people have lived in a community for decades and they see somebody new move in, they kind of feel a certain way about it. But when an area is suburban, fast growing, anybody can move there who can afford to live there. And that's why I'm really a fan of recommending places like Estero, Port St. Lucie, and Parish, areas that are kind of new and developing, because nobody's been there forever. You can't be like, well, I've been here 50 years and I've never seen a black family here. How is happening? No, like, dude, these were places that didn't used to exist and now exist. So it's whoever can afford to move in there. And I really do recommend for African Americans to go for those types of communities versus like older communities that are already established and people might feel a certain way about their neighborhood changing. And for you, that may not matter, but for people who are dealing with prejudice and racism, it's definitely something that would make your life a lot easier. The notion that these are new, fast-growing suburbs, it's never existed before. I recommended Estero, Florida as a great place for African Americans. And like I said, it's still predominantly white, but I think it's a great place for African Americans to move to. So places like Fort Myers Shores, areas like that, like North Fort Myers, are like established older neighborhoods, and you got like that Southern segregationist mindset. But like I said, Estero, it's all brand new areas, and if you're moving to Fort Myers and want to live somewhere where it's kind of like very bland and soulless, and you don't have to worry about people that I've been here 100 years type of crap, then for sure Estero, Florida is probably one of the best options in the whole Southwest Florida. So I'm going to continue to recommend Estero for African Americans who want to live in a nice, safe suburban area. I feel like this area here doesn't have the same issues as like when you get into Bonita Springs, you got a large Latino community. You get a little bit north in the Fort Myers, it's a lot of crime and a lot of like older neighborhoods. So I feel like Estero still provides kind of like a good place for African Americans. So I still recommend Estero. And Estero is what they call a village. It's like independent from Lee County. So like the permit process and all that, if you're building a house or whatever, it's still like its own entity, independent from Lee County. I think the only exception is that the Lee County Sheriff's Office is still the police out here. I don't think Estero has their own police per se, but other than the Sheriff's Department, everything else here is kind of independent, smaller, and usually in Lee County that works for the benefit of making a more proactive community versus like unincorporated areas where they're kind of just left abandoned. So I think it's really like from a municipal level, it's kind of very well managed. Because it's kind of suburban between Naples and Fort Myers, all the shopping is out here. So if you like shopping, going out for dinner, I mean, this really is a great, clean, safe community that has a lot to offer. It's suburban, but it's extraordinarily practical, halfway between Naples and Fort Myers. When it comes to practicality, it's hard to beat Estero. Estero is still a top place to live in Florida overall, regardless. So I think for this video and this purpose that we're having today, I would strongly consider recommending Estero to people if they want to live in the Fort Myers area. The city of Tampa. I do not recommend the city of Tampa for African Americans. It seems like it's just really one giant mess in Tampa. And while analytically it isn't like that bad in Tampa, it's kind of like middle of the ground. It's not the best, it's not the worst, but I just consider Tampa kind of like a mess, really. It's kind of the Oakland, California of Florida, if you could say. I wouldn't recommend Tampa for African Americans. For one, it's still kind of segregated with the African American community being in one area, Hispanic in one area, and white in another. It's still somewhat segregated. And I don't think Tampa's a racist city. I just feel like a lot of the ideologies have kind of crept in and kind of turned Tampa into, well, there's no nice way of explaining this. It's just kind of a mess in Tampa. And if you're moving to Florida looking for a better opportunity, Tampa is kind of generic and it kind of just fades into all the other cities in the United States. I don't know how I can get this across, but I just wouldn't recommend it. It's prone to protest, it's prone to looting, it's prone to civil unrest. The city of Tampa really is just one giant mess, and I don't see why I would recommend people going here at all. Now, I work in Tampa all the time, I like their food scene. We get a lot of subscribers from Tampa as well. Our video series in Tampa have broken the internet, but there's nothing about Tampa that I would say if you're moving to Florida and want to feel comfortable that Tampa's a place you should go to. I just feel like not so much racial tension exists in Tampa, but social anxiety and civil unrest. So, hear what I said carefully. I don't think that Tampa is the most racist place. I just feel that there's just too much civil unrest and social tension more than racial tension. There's just too many agitators and there's too many people that just perfectly play the role, the stereotypical roles that would kind of denote racism. So I would definitely not recommend Tampa. Everything that I've seen in Tampa wouldn't make me want to recommend it to you. And then it's like I don't really see African Americans in Tampa prospering. I see African Americans in Tampa looking unhealthy, obese. Just I don't see the community like compared to other communities like Broward County or even St. Petersburg, where you just see like a healthier, more vibrant community, people that are like actually trying to accomplish academic goals and stuff like that. What I see with Tampa is just people like kind of again fitting stereotypical roles, which isn't exactly where you want to put your family. So I'm not hating on Tampa, but the reality of Tampa is that like I don't see successful African Americans when I go to Tampa. I see people that are just kind of like comfortable in their rut, and most African Americans that are moving and have a little bit of money probably want to put themselves in an area where they're kind of not part of that mess. For a fact, when it comes to African Americans looking to live like decently and improve their lives and put themselves in good places, it probably serves you good to stay far and distant from social unrest or any other type of political issue that kind of puts you in the middle of the arena. So I feel like Tampa is exactly that. It's just the center of the arena, and there's always a spectacle or circus going on here. Too many battles, too many clashing opinions, just too many debates. I feel like Tampa is just too politically charged, and there's just too much going on here that I don't see why I would suggest somebody looking to live a peaceful, quiet life to move to a city that is constantly in unrest. It seems like any time that there's any type of social issue going on, Tampa seems to be extraordinarily volatile, extraordinarily explosive. It's the type of place where there's always civil unrest. And again, why would you end up in a place like that if you're looking to live a calm, peaceful life? So on the race map, you can clearly denote how Tampa is still kind of very segregated and segmented by race. But there's an area kind of down the middle I kind of highlighted for you, pushing up into Wesley, Chapel, and East Tampa, and back into Brandon, where you can see it's a little bit more mixed. And those are the areas that are kind of like more suburban. So if you are looking at the Tampa area, I would suggest areas like Riverview, somewhere in Brandon or in Wesley Chapel. It's just kind of outside of the urban core, which is pretty much segregated at this point in Tampa. And like I said, Tampa's not a city of racial tension, it's a city of social tensions. If you've been on Interstate 75, I mean, there's a freaking Confederate flag at the MLK exit in Tampa, so it's still kind of a southern city in a lot of ways. And then once you head back over towards Lakeland and Plant City and areas like that, you got a lot of gangs. You have a lot of like really backwards southern people. I think the comments that we reviewed at the start of the video talking about Lakeland and Polk County kind of give you the idea that Polk County really isn't it. The people there are really small towns with small minds. Get up in your business. It seems like every time we're in Polk County, Florida, we run into problems with people trying to tell us what to do or how to live. You might be a restaurant, and somebody might be like, well, you didn't open the door for her. It's just Polk County really has some absolute imbeciles. And if you go far enough into Hillsborough County, like Plant City, you start to run into all those types of people either way. So, like, if you don't like people butting into your life or trying to tell you how to live, Polk County really isn't it. And when you get to, like, the rural outskirts of Orlando, it's about the same issue. It's just, and again, Orlando is kind of a whole different mess to itself. But if you're pushing towards, like, the rural outskirts, like between Tampa and Orlando, my experience in those areas is that you run into people that, like Like, I remember recently we were in Polk County, Florida, and we ran into like somebody who was trying to tell me that I had to open a door for my wife. And my wife and I, before we walked out of the vehicle, we had different game plans because we had been driving for a long time, and one of us needed to use the bathroom, the other one needed to make a video of the outside of the restaurant. So we're working, and these old ladies over there in Polk County or like Plant City or something are like, "You didn't open the door for her," and it's just a lot of like small town, small mind stupidity. So I would definitely just not consider Polk County unless you really have a lot of patience to deal with some very stupid people. And at the end of the day, when it comes to Lakeland, it's the African Americans that live there that are telling you that they've just had enough of it. And in my brief experiences driving through there, it irritates me as well as a Hispanic. So it's definitely a bit too much. And well, Polk County, Florida kind of stands for backwardness, and that's kind of what they're aiming for. Pushing back into the Orlando area, Orlando is urban, it's suburban, it's growing, it's sprawling, and it's diverse. Just like Tampa, the urban core of Orlando is kind of segregated and kind of old school, probably what you want to avoid. But once you get into like Seminole County, it gets a little bit better. Osceola County is kind of like mediocre. It's not one thing or the other. But analytically, the counties near Orlando are very good. The crime analytics aren't too high. I would just avoid like the urban core of Orlando and try to find something like Sanford or say Lake Mary, let's say, or Mount Dora. It's just something like in the outskirts of Orlando. You should do fairly well. Orlando is kind of a place where the urban core is getting really, really crimey. And because there's so much suburbia to Orlando, analytically it doesn't reflect that. But I would definitely avoid like the urban core of Orlando. For the race map of Orlando, I've highlighted the area that's kind of mixed and more balanced, but you can see that the rest of the urban core is kind of more racially segregated. You should probably avoid those areas. So it goes without saying that right now in 2025, if you're looking for a good place to live, you want to live in a place that is more diverse, not so much a place that is more monotone when it comes to racial demographics. And without a doubt, you definitely want to avoid places that are clearly pronounced by racial lines. In the Orlando area, Titusville comes to mind. It's either all black or all white. Those are the types of areas you definitely want to avoid. They're trapped in time and continue to just further segregate people into different areas. The areas where anybody can move in and anybody can mingle are the types of places where you're going to find the most peace, quiet, tranquility, and prosperity. But when you see places like Titusville that are just stark racial contrast, let me tell you, those are the places you definitely want to avoid. By the way, the racial map is from bestneighborhoods.org. You can just Google the name of a city, Tampa race map, and it'll give you like a map of the area. And then you can pan and zoom in and out. It's a great tool for discovering how things are happening. I don't know how they update this thing so quickly, but it updates fairly quickly. So it's a great tool if you're looking to like understand the demographics of an area. I have found so far that the best, most prosperous areas where people are happiest are the areas where there's a little bit of diversity, the areas where there's stark contrast, where everybody's either black or everybody's all white. Those are the type of places that you're going to have the worst experiences. And finally, the Miami area. Left it for last because it's a little controversial. So when you talk about Miami, there's a lot of African Americans, young people in particular, moving to the Kendall area. It's a predominantly Hispanic area. Now, Hispanics, particularly the ones that are in Miami, Cubans, are all to themselves different breeds. So it's very different than like Mexicans or other Hispanics. Miami is its own beast. The African Americans here who are sensitive and easily offended are not going to do very well. But for those who can kind of have a lot of self-confidence and stand their grounds, I'm seeing a lot of African Americans doing well simply because they have the English language. There's areas like Richmond Heights that are historic. You know, they've always been African American. And then you're starting to see African Americans just kind of pop up all through here. Economically, it's very challenging to live in Miami-Dade County. It's a very competitive job market. Rents are extraordinarily high. But the analytics don't lie. Homicide rates for African Americans outside of the urban core of Miami. When I'm talking about that, I'm talking about, so there's the good Miami, the southwest side of Miami, the Coral Gables and the Kendalls. Those are the areas where African Americans are prospering. Then on the northwest side of Miami, pushing into Broward County, you got the African Americans that are getting pushed out of Miami into southern Broward and North Miami-Dade, and that's a whole different mess that should definitely be avoided. And again, with Miami, it's the same principle. Stick to suburban areas of diversity and stay the crap away from the urban cores that are more segregated. In particular, Northwest Miami is starting to push into Broward County. These are people that are being outpriced, so it's not going to be a pretty picture there. Hey, that's my evaluation of the best and worst places to live for African Americans in Florida.